Good morning. The first attack that Job made against God and that Satan made against Job and God was that God had placed a hedge around him and given him great prosperity. And if he had all of this wealth, of course, Job was going to love him. The second attack on Job and on God was that God had given him good health. And if you took that health away from him, Job would no longer love God, he would curse God. So in the first attack, the first accusation, we find the wealth gospel, the prosperity gospel. And in the second attack, we find the health gospel. So we have the health-wealth gospel. The health-prosperity gospel is first originated and accused of God and Job by Satan himself. The narrator, God, and Job all say it isn't true. All three of them say it isn't true. And that's one of the things that we have to carry through our entire study of the book of Job. We carry through our study of the book of Job, one of the things is that he's blameless, and that he fears God, and that he turns from evil. And he doesn't do it because he's healthy, and he doesn't do it because he's wealthy. He doesn't do it because of what God gives him. He does it because God is God. And so that's going to be the argument and the struggle that's going to go all the way through the book. And that's one of the things that we have to carry all the way through that book. So now, his possessions and his wealth and his family have all been taken from him. And we find, then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with the sore boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a potsherd and he scraped himself with it until while he was sitting among the ashes. And there he sits for the rest of the book. The entire geography of the book takes place right there. He never moves. And all of the conversations that we have for the next 38 chapters all take place in that one spot. And so that has to be remembered. The man that they're talking to and the man that is talking takes place in this one place. So all of the conversations that we're going to take up next take place in the ash heap. This is all that can happen to Job. Nothing worse can happen to Job. If one thing more happens, if God gave Satan one more inch, Job would be dead. He would learn nothing, and we would learn nothing. But there's one more trial that takes place for Job. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." And so he's given one more challenge, one more terrible thing that happens. Because you see, those broken dishes that he's scraping himself with, those are her dishes. And that man that's scraping himself on top of that broken, destitute man, that's her man. That's her husband. That's her provider. And those children that have been killed, those are her children too. And so we have two reactions here from two people who are suffering the same thing. One of them says, we worship God. And the other one says, curse God and die. So there's the choices that are placed before them. There's the choices that's placed before us. And she then becomes an agent of Satan, just like his friends are going to become. Satan said, Job will curse God, and his wife said, do it. So the narrator has Job with integrity, that he is blameless. And God said Job has integrity, and his wife knew he had integrity, and now she says, lose your integrity. That's the thing you need to lose. Just like Eve, who tells her husband, Satan says, eat. And she says, Satan says, curse. The difference is, Adam listened to his wife, and Job did not. Because Job said to her, but he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. This is what Adam should have said to Eve. When she came up and said, hey, look, I've got this fruit. God said not to eat it. Satan said to eat it, and it'll do us a lot of good. We'll be like God. He should have said, no, 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 no. He should have stopped her there. And he didn't do it. He was supposed to protect the garden. He was supposed to protect the woman. He was supposed to protect the family. And he didn't do it. He was given dominion, and he allowed the dominion to be taken over by the serpent. So we have here all of the characters from Genesis chapter 3. The man, the woman, and the serpent. Except here, Eden itself has been taken away. Now there is complete destruction and loss of health. The difference is between the response of Adam and the response of Job. Adam ate. Job refused. Adam took the fruit. Job didn't even take the bait. And Satan said that he would. And God said that he wouldn't. So, when we come to the New Testament, we find that Peter and the apostles are faced with something real similar to this. Jesus said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat. But I prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And you, when once you have sinned again, strengthen your brothers. Now, the first you in here is plural. So he talks to Satan, but he addresses all of the apostles. He's saying here that all of your faith might not fail. Because the apostles are going to be the witnesses that are going to spread the gospel. If they turn from that witness, if they do not proclaim what they have seen, everything falls apart. The gospel is for nothing. And so he says, I prayed for all of you because Satan asked permission to sift you like wheat. And it's going to happen. They all get sifted like wheat. In fact, all but one of them are killed for the gospel of Jesus Christ. But then he turns to Peter singular. And he says, you, Peter, after you repent and you come back, then you strengthen the brothers. Satan demanded to sift all of you, all of Jesus' apostles. But the last one is directed to Peter. You come back and you strengthen your brothers. And that's what he does. He strengthens us. In this you greatly rejoice. In this suffering you greatly rejoice, even though for a little while, if necessary, you have been distressed by various trials, so that the proof of your faith, being more precious than gold, which is perishable, even though tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And though you have not seen him, you love him. And this is going to be from Job. He never sees God. He says, I wish I could. I wish I could see him. I wish I could talk to him. I wish I could stand and make my case before him. But he's invisible. He passes me by. I don't know what he's doing. Though you do not see him, but you believe in him, and Job did. I believe in him. I believe he's sovereign. I believe he did all of this stuff, but I can't see him. And you greatly rejoice with inexpressible and full of glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith and the salvation of your souls. So Peter's given us one of the reasons that this is being allowed to happen to Job. If it's necessary for Christians, then they have to have the proof of their faith, because the proving of their faith makes them more precious than gold. It's the heating of gold that removes the dross and makes the gold more perfect. And that's what's happening here in Job. God's making a son. He's making a son for glory. There's more going on here than even Satan realizes. And the result is going to be in praise and glory and honor, according to Peter, at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And that's what we saw from the very beginning that James says about Job. Remember that James says about Job that the end comes at the end. That it has to do with the revelation of Jesus Christ, the return of Jesus Christ. Job is a prophet, and he's telling us to remain faithful and endure until the very end. It's not about what we get now. It's not about our best life now. The problem, as the Bible presents it from the very beginning, is death and separation from God. The solution is Jesus Christ and the return when he comes back with his holy angels. He takes vengeance on those who know not the gospel and accepts those who are Christians. So, if you take out the clause here, when you read a passage of Scripture or you read anything, sometimes if you take out the clause, you see the power. So we take this clause out, and it says, so that the proof of your faith you may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. It's this proving of your faith that turns you into gold so that you may be refound in a certain result. There's something that's happening. There's a reason that the persecution and the suffering goes on. So this is what we saw that James said that Job was about. The outcome of the Lord's dealings. Our faith cannot be based on our present circumstances. No matter what's going on around us, this is not the thing that we based our faith. We don't tell our story. We tell God's story. We tell the things that happened back then. And Job himself is going to recognize this. We're going to jump ahead just a little bit. Job himself is going to recognize this. He says, behold, I go forward, but he's not there, and backwards, and I can't perceive him. Remember, Peter said, we don't see him, but we love him. When he acts on the left, I cannot behold him. When he acts on the right, I cannot see him. But he knows the way I take. And he has tried me, and I shall come out as gold. So Peter is just telling us what happened to Job. And that has to happen to us. And then what happens? We remain faithful. My foot has held to his path. I have kept his way and not turned aside. I have not departed from the commandments of his lips. I have treasured his words from his mouth, and more necessary than food. So, Peter and the author of Job and Job are all saying the same thing. Job says, I can't see him, but when it's all done, I'm going to come out as gold. I don't know what he's doing. And that's a big problem in the book of Job. They don't know what God's doing. And when God gets down to the end of the book of Job, he's going to say, you can't know what I'm doing. But just like Job at the beginning says, he fears God, he trusts God, and he follows God. So the trials are not here to trip us up, but to purify us and keep us on the path. Now, I want to jump over to the book of Revelation because certain things take place in the historical storyline of the Bible. Things change, and things changed in heaven. So what we have in heaven is Satan, the accuser, is there, and it looks like he's supposed to be there. Where have you been? I've been on the earth. What have you been doing? I've been doing what I'm supposed to. I'm accusing people of wrong. Have you noticed Job? He's done no wrong. Oh, yeah, I think he's doing wrong because he's doing it for the wrong reason. Oh, no, he's not. Well, let me try something. Okay, go ahead. But don't kill him. There's what's going on. And so we see we have a prosecutor, we have an accuser who has a job to do in heaven. But he becomes a false prosecutor. He becomes a false accuser, and he tells lies about people, and he deceives about people. And he deceived about Job. And so he's supposed to be there, but he's doing something he's not supposed to be doing. So now we want to jump over to Revelation for just a minute and see what happens after the cross. Things change. And there was war in heaven, and Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. This is the Leviathan that's going to be talked about in Job. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. There was a place for them in heaven. But now they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and there's a war in heaven. And now there's no place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who was the devil, who was called Satan. And he deceives the whole world, and he was thrown down to the earth, and the angels were thrown down with him, and I heard a loud voice of heaven saying, here's what the voice says. Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of our Christ have come. Who's in charge now? Who has the authority now? Christ. Because as Psalm 110 says, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. He sat down next to God. Now he's king. He's sitting at the right hand of God because of the things that he suffered on earth and because of the resurrection and the purification that he came back to heaven. So now, there's no room for Satan, the false accuser, in heaven. Why? Because the king is there. Because now he's in heaven, and we don't have that. He's the accuser of our brethren. He's supposed to be the accuser of the sinful. But he was accusing the faithful. He was accusing Job falsely. Rather than being the prosecutor that he was supposed to do and say, these guys aren't doing what you said, God. These people do not have a heart for you, God. He came up and said, look at Job. Job's doing it for the wrong reason. And God says, no, he's not. He says, I'll show you. And so the purification of Job begins. because Satan falsely accuses. So this accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, and he who accuses them before our God day and night, constantly accusing them. And they overcame him. How? How do we who are accused overcome Satan? When Satan accuses me, is he right? When he says, Steve July is a sinner, is he right?
All have sinned.
He's right. All have sinned. He's right. I'm a sinner. When he goes to God and he accuses him, he's right. But what happened? I overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. The word of the testimony of the apostles that said Jesus Christ raised from the dead. Now the blood has come. Jesus is on the throne, and he comes up and he says, he's a sinner. No, he's not. Well, yeah, I saw him sin. He's in Christ. You accuse me. You accuse Jesus Christ who's sitting on the throne. There's no more accuser in heaven. Now there's an advocate. The accuser has been replaced by the advocate. And Job's going to see this. As we go through that, Job's going to start figuring this out. He's going to say, I know I have one. Seth, a couple weeks ago, did a table talk, and he said that Job says, I wish there was somebody there that could put a hand on me and a hand on God. I wish there was a referee that could pull us apart right now and explain this to me. Jesus Christ has got a hand on us both. He's got a hand on God, and he's got a hand on me. And there's no place for Satan in there now, because the accuser is gone, because when he accuses me, he accuses Jesus Christ, and he is without sin. And he is on the throne, and he's been raised from the dead, and he's there eternally. And that's what he's telling us here. And they overcame because of the blood of the Lamb and the word of the testimony, and they did not love even their life, even when faced with death. Just like Job, curse God and die. I can't do that. I'm faced with death right now, but I cannot curse God just to alleviate my pain. For this reason, rejoice, O heavens, and those who dwell in him. Woe to the earth and the sea, and the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that his time is short. Where's Satan now? He's not in heaven anymore making accusations against us. Where is he now? He's on the earth. And what's he doing? He's come down to the earth and he has great wrath. Why? His time's short. He's out of time, and he's doing nothing but trying to destroy. That's what Satan's doing now. It's just wrath. There's no accusation. He can make no accusation. He can't get back into heaven to make the accusation. But he still has this wrath. And that's what's going on in the world today. That's why Christians are being persecuted. That's why governments and religious groups are persecuting Christians. Because of the wrath of Satan, he knows his time is short. See, on D-Day, 1944, the Allied troops took 50 miles of beach. And when they owned that 50 miles of beach, they started bringing men and material and tanks and bullets and everything that they needed to defeat the Axis, to defeat Hitler. And the day after Normandy, everybody in the world knew the war was over. There's nothing Hitler can do now. The only thing that Hitler had going for him was the fact that there was an ocean between him and the greatest army on the face of the earth and all of those materials that they were producing in this country. But now it's on his turf. He's heading to drive them out of France. He's heading to drive them out of Italy, and he's heading right for Berlin. The war is over, and everybody knows it. But it goes on for over a year. For over a year, there is death and destruction because he knew his time was short, and he brought all of the wrath that he could bring. And Satan is that way right now. He knows it's over. And he's just doing all of the destruction that he possibly can because he knows his time is short. And so, from the time of Job being an accuser, he can no longer accuse us because now we have the blood of Jesus Christ. No, you accuse him. You accuse Jesus because he's in Christ. And so get out of heaven. And the war drove him out of heaven, drove him to the earth. And on the earth, he's doing as much damage to God's people as he possibly can because he knows his time is short. Now, back to the book of Job. Now, when Job's friends heard that all of this adversity had come upon him. They came each one from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, and they made an appointment to come together to sympathize with him and to comfort him. What's the difference between sympathy? What's the difference between sympathy and comfort? They came to bring two things, sympathy and comfort. I can have sympathy for somebody I don't even know. I've got sympathy for people in Las Vegas. I've got sympathy for people in Houston. I've got sympathy for people in Florida. I've got sympathy for people over in the typhoon that just hit the eastern side of the world. But am I bringing them any comfort? Sympathy can be done from a distance. It can be done with a card. Comfort requires a pillow. So they came to bring him sympathy, and they came to bring him comfort. And I'm going to give you a little head start on what happens there. They bring him neither. They don't bring him any sympathy, and they don't bring him any comfort. And your assignment for next week is to read the 4th and the 5th chapter where Eliphaz starts his talk. And most of the time, I would tell a class or someone that's studying the Bible, look for what's going on here that's good. I want to give you the assignment on those 2 chapters to look for what's going on here that's bad. Because we saw at the end of the book that he says, my wrath is against Eliphaz and his friends. God's wrath is against him for what he says. But some of the things he says are going to sound pretty good. And it's like Doug said, sometimes it's the attitude or the tone or the intention that they're using. So they're saying a thing that looks like it's good, but it's really, really bad. So read that with the intention of looking for the bad. Rocky Marciano's, the boxer's trainer, was sitting in the hotel room when they used to have Gideon Bibles in there. And he walked in there, and here's this guy who never finished school, and he's got the Bible out, and he's sitting on the bed reading it. Rocky Marciano walked in, and he says, hey, what are you doing? He says, I'm looking for mistakes. So I want you to look at the Bible next week in this passage of Scripture and look for mistakes. Not mistakes in the Bible, but mistakes in what Eliphaz is saying and what he's doing. And they're really quite profound. And sometimes as you read through there, you go, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Because it's in the Bible. So let's go to that passage and look for mistakes. And as we go through there, remember that he doesn't know what happened in heaven. He's not convinced that Job is blameless. And they all hold the same belief about God. Job and his friends, that God is in control and that bad is punished. So they all believe those same things. So go in there and read that and see if we can't make some progress next week. So, when these guys came in and they lifted up their eyes at a distance, they didn't recognize him. They raised their voices and wept. And each tore their robe and threw dust on their heads. Then they sat down on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, no one speaking a word to him, and they saw that his pain was very great. So sympathy and comfort are 2 different things. So when they see him a ways off and they get up there, I went to the hospital room one day. A friend of mine's daughter had been in an accident. And I walked in there, and she had been disfigured. And I want to tell you that they were able to fix her. She's just beautiful. But I walked in there, and this young girl was disfigured. And I mean, it was a shocking wound. And the one thing you don't want to do when you go in there is say, man, you look terrible. You're never going to be right. That's the one, you're never going to comfort anybody or bring sympathy to anybody when you say, I don't see how you can live through this. My father, who did not like to come upon an automobile accident or somebody in distress or anything, when I was a small child, he took a first aid rescue course. I had it at the Township Hall, out at Thetford Township. It was at the Township Hall. And my dad came home. I don't think he went back because they showed some videos and some pictures and stuff of the tragedy and what you're supposed to do. And I don't think my father ever went back. But I remember him saying this. First thing they told us is you're supposed to reassure people. So if a guy's yelling, my leg, my leg, my leg, my dad said, your leg's doing fine. It's over there in a ditch. I just saw it. That comforts no one. You don't bring that to comfort someone or to reassure someone. The first thing they do is they come in and they start screaming and hollering at the pain he's in. He knows the pain he's in. So the very first thing that they do, they've destroyed any chances they've had to bring any sympathy and comfort to the man. And I want you to remember that the very last words that we hear from Job are these. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? And in all of this, he did not sin with his lips. Because remember, Satan said Job would curse him. And his wife said to do it. So now, here come the curses. All right. So, the last thing we hear him say is, shall we accept good from not and not accept adversity? And in all this, he did not sin with his lips. Chapter 3, verse 1, after Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. He doesn't curse God. He curses the day that he was even born. Now, we have to see that some time has passed here, because it's taken his friends a while to come from other countries, and they sat there for a week, so he may have been a month or two sitting on this ash heap thinking about his life and what he's going to do, and he's not making any progress. And so after everything happens, he tells his wife, he says, don't curse God. We have to accept adversity from God. And he's going to say later, if God didn't do this, who did? But he says now he's had a month to think about it, and there's nothing he can do. And he cursed the day of his birth. This is something that happened afterward. This is something that took place after he's had some time to think about it. Now, what happens in this chapter 3 sets the scene for the rest of the book, the rest of the conversations. We have to read the conversations in order because one conversation answers another. So in this week, when you read Job chapter 4 and 5, Eliphaz is addressing Job's soliloquy. He's just doing a self-talk here. He's just analyzing. He's not attacking anybody or anything. He's just telling the pain that he's in. This is a lament. While I was doing some research for this class a couple of years ago, I found this preacher who had preached a sermon. He was preaching through Job, and on a Sunday night he came in, and they had no prayers, they had no songs, they did nothing, but he preached this lament and sent the people home because he just wanted them to feel it so that we can see the actual situation of what was taking place here in the book of Job. This is the broken man of all broken men. It's his first speech, but it's not an argument against anybody yet. All the rest of the arguments are going to be against this speech and against the speeches that Job gives in an argument against his friends. So he begins this lament. He says, let the day perish on which I was to be born, and the night which said, a boy is conceived. May it be darkness. Let not God above care for it, nor light shine on it. Let darkness and black and gloom claim it. Let the clouds settle on it, and the blackness of the day terrify it. Now, we've come into poetry. Unless you have the old King James Version, all the other translations write this out in verse form. So it's written like a poem. Now, the old King James doesn't do that, but the New King James does, and all other translations write it out in poem form. And we're not going to go over this poetry a lot, but if you remember from the Jonah class, we saw that when the poetry starts, it's not written because it rhymes or even because it has the same number of lines, but the poetry is written in such a way that it has the words intensified. So one line repeats another line with different words. So as he's going through this, he's going to intensify certain words in here. And if we look at what he's saying here and just kind of draw it out. In verse 3, he says, let the day perish. In verse 4, let the day be dark. Verse 5, the deep darkness. Verse 6, night and thick darkness are going to seize it. Verse 7, barren, nothing born. Not only do I want it dark, I don't want nothing born on this day. Verse 8, cursed, and cursed by the serpent. Verse 9, no light should have ever been created on that day. And verse 10, cursed the day that I was born. Now he's cursing the light, which is the first thing that God said should be created. He doesn't curse God, but he's cursing that day. And it looks to me like he might be getting real close to it. And I especially want us to notice verse 8, because verse 8 is something that's going to come up later in the book. We need to pay attention to that. Let those who curse the day, who are prepared to rouse Leviathan. Now, if you have the old King James Version, they don't use that word there, but they do use it later at the end of the book, and it's the same word. So in the old King James Version, it says mourning, like a person that is there to mourn. Brad said Wednesday night that our translations and our understanding of the language has gotten better over the years. So 400 years ago or so, when that was written, they weren't sure what to do with that word. So rather than just translate it or transliterate it and bring it over into our language as Leviathan, they tried to make it a day of mourning, to arouse feelings of mourn within us. But it's actually the word Leviathan. Now, the word Leviathan literally means the coiled up one, serpent. So he says, let those who curse this day be the ones who are able and skilled, who have been prepared to rouse up Satan, to rouse up the one who brought the curse of the birth from the very beginning. And so here we have him saying that I want this day destroyed so bad, the only thing that I can think of that could possibly destroy that day is Satan himself. And so if you can find somebody who has the skill or who is prepared to rouse up Satan, let him destroy the day that I was born. So here's Satan, who brought the curse on the earth. He brought the curse on the man. He brought the curse of death. He brought the curse of the sweat of the brow, and he brought the curse of childbirth. The very curse that was brought on childbirth, bring up Leviathan, because he's the guy that can destroy the very day that I was born, because I don't want to be here any longer. And so that's what's being said here, and that's going to come up at the end, because God's going to tell him who Leviathan is and who has control of him. Now, over in Isaiah, the 27th chapter, talking about the deliverance of Israel and future, the deliverance of the Christians, in that day, the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent, the coiled serpent, and he will kill the dragon who lives in the sea, and on that day, the vineyard of wine will sing of it. This is a great day. This is what's being talked about in Revelation that we just looked about. He was driven from heaven. He was defeated. And we jump down a couple verses. Therefore, through this, Jacob's iniquity, all the sin, will be forgiven, and this will be the full price of the pardoning of sin. What's the price of the pardoning of sin? The crushing of the head of the serpent. From the very beginning, this is what was promised. And he said this is going to happen, and it happens when Christ comes, dies, and is raised, and sits on that throne, drives him out of heaven, crushes his skull, puts an end to it. It's the fulfillment of it. This takes place when the seed of the woman crushes the head of the coiled one. When the full price of pardoning of sin takes place, and this is what happens at the cross. Now, we're going to see Leviathan again. But remember, Job does not know that it was Satan in heaven who was bringing the accusations against him. Job doesn't know these things. We always have to remember that. Job's friends do not know these things. And Job does not know that Satan has been restrained by God, that God is still in control of Satan, because it doesn't look like it. And so Job has not been allowed to lose his life so that he can learn and that we can learn. Now, the first thing Job says is, let the serpent destroy the day I was born. I want to jump and take a quick look at the very end of Job, because these are so far apart. By the time you get done reading Job, you don't make the connection. Go right down to the very end. God's talking about Leviathan. And he said, will he make a covenant with you? Job wanted to make a covenant with him to destroy that day. I want him to do something. Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him for a servant forever? You going to serve him? And then a few verses later, he says, no one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him. Remember what he said? Job says, who can arouse him for me? put an end to that day? God says nobody can arouse him. No one's that fierce. Who then can stand before me? If you can't stand before Satan, how are you ever going to stand before me? Who has given to me that I should repay him whatever is under the whole heavens in mine? Satan is a created being. And I have control of him. Don't you worry about Satan. But you're never going to understand all of this, Job. Keep that faith. That's the message of the book of Job. So let's get back to our text here. Remember this serpent Leviathan, the coiled one, because he's going to come up here at the end of the book. And this is a detail that we can't miss, or I think we miss a big chunk of what Job's telling us. Job says the biggest curse of the universe is Leviathan. Job thinks Satan has the ability to undo a day in creation and undo a birth that the curse was put on. And Job calls anyone who has the power to bring serpent to that curse, to curse the day, to bring forth his skill. And God says, nobody's got that power. You can't bring forth Satan, but I can control Satan, and I will destroy Satan. So he's calling up all of the forces of evil who can do the work or undo the work of the Creator, to destroy the light, to destroy the stars of the sky, to destroy a day, to destroy birth of God's sons. And the reason in verse 9 is because that day did not shut up the light. The light got into his eyes. I remember the day that my two sons were born. One of my sons was born, and they brought him out like this, and his eyes were going. He saw a light for the first time, and I thought, that boy's going to be smart. He's taking it all in. He's going to be a brilliant man. My other boy came out screaming and hollering. His eyes were shut. He didn't know where he was at. He's not, open your eyes, boy. Look around. The light got into his eyes. Satan brought the curse of pain of childbirth, and Job wishes that he would have made the ultimate curse on childbirth when he was born and not let him be born at all. And so now we come up with some questions. Job starts to ask some questions. First of all, why did I not die at birth? There's a sophomore philosophy 101. Why am I here? Why didn't I die at birth? Why was I not stillborn? Why did this not come to an end? And then down in verse 20, he's going to ask another question again. Why is light given to him who suffers? If I'm just going to suffer here, why was I even born? If all my life is suffering, why am I here? And why does this go on? And so he's going to go through here, and he just says, I wish I was like those kings in a tomb. Those kings were in a tomb, and those kings did absolutely great things in their lives, or the criminals, they did absolutely horrible things in their lives, but they're all resting now. None of them are up being king and building, and none of them are in the prison being tortured. I wish I was like the dead people. I wish I would have never been born. So why is light given to him who suffers? And the life of a bitter soul. Those are the questions that he asks. Now, he says in verse 23, why is light given to a man whose way is hidden and whom God hedged in? So he feels hedged in, that he can't get out because of the persecution that he has, the suffering that he has. But Satan said, you've hedged him in and given him everything to protect him. So Satan says, you've hedged him in so he doesn't even see any suffering. Job turns that around and says, you've hedged me in so I can't escape the suffering. So always look for when the same word comes up. Sometimes they're related to one another, and sometimes they're not. Satan's friends are going to come to him and say, we know what God's doing. We know how God runs the world, and if I was God, this is how I would do it. And if you do what we say, confess whatever secret sin that you have, and if you do this and obey, you'll have your best life now. And they should just give him this book. Here's your best life now, Job. He's sitting on there. Are you going to hand the man that book? Or are you going to tell him about the God of glory who sent Jesus Christ to the earth? And the real reason that this suffering is going on. So Eliphaz is going to be our subject for next week. None of Job's friends know what's going on. Job doesn't know what's going on. And Job and his friends both have the same ideas about God and how God runs his world. His friends are never going to change. Job is going to start changing over time. Any questions or comments?
That kind of comes out of what he said here. If I'm just going to suffer, why do I live? You know,
Yeah,
I'm supposed to live to enjoy myself. If I'm just going to suffer, why live?
and we've seen people like that. I don't think we're supposed to take the book of Job and say, I'm suffering too. We're supposed to look at the book of Job as the extreme example. And so as the extreme example of suffering, as we see, Job is a type of Christ. But Job is also a type of our faith that stays until the end. So James kind of gives us the parameters of how to study Job and how to read Job. It's not about getting the best stuff for this life now. The whole purpose of the book of Job is bad things are going to happen. You're not going to understand where they're coming from or why. Your job is to remain faithful. So, in the Bible, wisdom is not theoretical. Wisdom is something that happens. Anything else? Thanks for coming.